It's really an honor to be here. I'm not a designer, and I have had the past 6 years of my life has been this kind of remarkable journey of truly understanding the power and the value of design in ways that I hope to express to you. I'm sure you have all had people say, yes, I really get how much design brings to a process. But I work in a world where sometimes it's not bad design that's the problem, there's sort of no design happening. And I want to talk a little bit about what happens when you design systems, especially the systems of our government, without that in place. So we say at Code for America often that the 2 biggest levers for improving people's lives at scale are technology and government, but we really actually mean design. There's plenty of technology in government. There's billions and billions of dollars worth of technology in government. But what there isn't there is an understanding of users. And I would like to start, if you don't mind, by reading you something. We really have been in the business of getting people from primarily the consumer tech industry into government, either working in government or working with government, to solve problems for people in the communities in America. And after one of these engagements where we had a team of fantastic people come and work with the city and county of San Francisco, completely unbeknownst to me, one of the fellows, the Code for America fellows who'd come from the tech industry, wrote a blog post about his experience. And I just want to read you one paragraph from it to start out. His name was Jake Solomon. He said, "This is San Francisco's main food stamps office. People call it 1235, as in 1235 Mission Street. I walked past the concrete pillars, through the metal detector, with 2 security guards, past a table of scattered paper forms, and into the main waiting room. It was loud. Voices echoed from the speakers on the ceiling and off the linoleum floors. There was one big line leading to one big countertop called Service Counter B. A tall black man stepped to the front of the line. He hunched forward and leaned his hands on the countertop. A thick, clouded sheet of bulletproof glass separated him from the worker, short for social worker in the world of human services. They spoke through 2 skinny conference-style microphones mounted on the glass. He leaned in and grabbed the mic to flex it up further, but it wouldn't go any further. He hunched a bit lower, putting his ear to the glass. Then, after a few more moments, he lowered his knees to the ground, pulled the mic down to his face, and rested his arms along the countertop. He finished the conversation on his knees. So there I was in San Francisco, one of the greatest and most prosperous cities in our country, watching a man on his knees, struggling to hear through bulletproof glass, trying to access nutrition assistance from our federal government." Jake went on to talk about the notion of disdain for users and all the ways in which this is expressed. He was wanting to describe this physical expression of that disdain in these offices. But what he actually spent the year doing was dealing with the online systems that express that disdain and trying to make them just a little bit better. But I think that notion of disdain is one that's very powerful. He called this post "People, Not Data," because we live in times where everybody wants to talk about the power of data, and we believe very much in the power of data, but not when it misses the people behind that data. We think that's been happening in government services for many years, and I think missing what's going on behind the data is something we all probably thought about this November. We care about this not just because we care about better digital services in government, because most of us here, I would assume, are taxpayers in the American government, and we spend about 20% of our GDP on social programs that are built with, most of the time, enormous disdain for users. So you might think, well, that's not that much. What about countries that have really great social outcomes? We think about the Norway, Sweden, Denmark. They're spending about 20, 21, 22%. But what they don't have is this. If you walk around San Francisco, you'll be seeing this on our streets. We're spending 20% of our GDP, but we're not getting the outcomes that we need, and that's why we care. This is a woman who represents an actual user of one of our services. It's not actually her. She does use food stamps, and we have a client that I'm going to talk about, but to anonymize, sort of telling a little story. Our client is named Renee. She was actually a freelance designer who fell behind on work when she got sick, and she didn't have enough money to put food on the table for her 2 kids. So she knew about something called supplemental nutrition assistance, and she went to apply online. So the good news is in California, you can apply online. There are many places with very, very hard to do so where they don't have the application online. And this is what she experienced when she went online. It's a 50-screen application with over 200 and something questions. It's going to go by too quickly for you to see it, but there's a whole page. It's a series of questions that are variant on, have you or anyone else in your household traded food stamps for guns, ammunition, or drugs since April 16th, 1996? But there's 10 questions like that. So this is not a great experience. And by the way, as I mentioned, it's not that we're underfunding this. This was an $800 million purchase by the state of California that we spend $80 million a year to maintain. So at Code for America, we decided we could make it a little better, and what we sort of started out doing was we can get all the information that we need for most people to apply for food stamps in about 7 minutes on a mobile phone. By the way, that other thing doesn't work at all on mobile. It won't even load. And most people who are trying to access food assistance don't have a broadband internet connection at home. So we thought, great, we fixed the problem. Now people can apply for food stamps, and everybody who needs to get food assistance in our state, which by the way is an amazing investment. It's the program in our social safety net that is most highly correlated with better health and education outcomes for kids. Well, great, we fixed the problem. But we didn't think necessarily we were seeing hugely higher rates of approval. So we started following up with our users by text message and saying, okay, what happened next now that you've applied? And we found out things like this. We found that some double-digit percentage of our users in one county were getting the letter telling them when their interview is, which is the next step in the process, after the date of the interview, or in a language they didn't understand. But most people actually never even made it to the next step after they used that nice, simpler application. They would get letters in the mail that, and I think in the interest of time, I won't read this out loud to you. You probably can't read it from where you're sitting. But these letters have these ridiculous legalese statements over and over again. Some of these letters 4, 5, and 6 pages long. And you can read the whole thing and not know what the office is asking of you. In most cases, what these really say are things like, you need to send in a pay stub again or your benefits are going to end. But you might not get the mail, but even if you read it, as I did, I didn't understand what it was asking for. In one county, all of our users said, well, I got this fraud prevention program form, and it asks a lot of questions that are really intimidating. I'm afraid to answer them. They're questions about my criminal past. I'm afraid someone in my family, so I didn't return it. And we called the county welfare director in this county and said, your users are getting a form, and for all that we can tell, there is no law, policy, or regulation that requires you to ask your users these questions. And she said, we don't send out that form. And she called us back 2 weeks later and she said, thank you so much for telling me that. I had no idea that the eligibility workers were using that form that was phased out many, many years ago. We've stopped doing it. And then in our data from our users, we could see that enrollment rates went up. She was incredibly grateful for the insight into what was happening with users, as was the other folks who didn't know that the letters were going out late, didn't know that they were going out in the wrong language, because it gives social workers and leaders within government the ability to fix the problems. And it turns out that they almost always want to fix them, but they don't have a lot of insight into their users' experience. So really what we've been doing is just showing people in government data about where their system fails and then helping them fix those problems, which very often are not problems of a website, though that is the most visible piece of it, but problems of government operations and feedback loops. This is a feedback loop I'm sure is very familiar to everybody in this room. We happen to use it very heavily at Code for America. We also have this feedback loop, which is we work with government partners to build trust, Then we build an alternative app that creates sort of a shadow program on top of their program. We collect data from users. We help them debug their operations. We very often change policy, and that's something I'm excited about but not going to talk about much today, is that there's actually, this is the way you get to better policy. And then that creates more trust with users, and we'll put ourselves in a position where we can actually make food stamps work better, be cheaper to administer, and close the participation gap. So despite those great benefits I talked about, only about 60% of the people who are eligible for food stamps in California receive the benefit today. That's several million people who could be getting help putting food on the table for their kids. Their kids could be going to school with breakfast in their bellies. It's also money that goes directly into our local communities and stimulates our economy. So it's really a win-win. We call this our, actually, I'm sorry, this is wrong. It's outside-in strategy. We're working on the outside, but it's going back into the operations of government. We also have an inside-out strategy, which is essentially get people into government with design and technology expertise. This is a fellow from our very first year of the program, which was in 2011. In fact, I think that folks from Alan Cooper's company helped us train these fellows. It's been a part of our philosophy from the beginning. Max Ogden was a developer from Portland who came down to be part of the first program, and he was sort of canonical that year because he had this very long beard, and it meant that in Boston City Hall, people who needed help with data would say, "There's this crazy guy with the beard. Go find him, and he'll help you with your data." And everybody in City Hall ended up loving us. So we'd gone there to make this API for education that frankly never happened because it's very hard to do big projects in government when you're just getting started. But while we were there, they asked us to work on a problem that sort of became a pattern for us. It was a small problem, but big to the people who touched it. And it was that they had changed the rules around how kids were assigned to public schools. But they didn't really know how to communicate this change other than through a 28-page printed brochure in about 6-point type. The problem is, it was an algorithm based on a number of things, including a walk shed between your home and the school, and paper can't do that very well. So the mayor of Boston asked our folks to come in and do something about this, and in about 10 weeks, sort of about 1.5 of our fellows, we had one of our design fellows was working on this half-time, came and put together something that will seem pretty basic to you. You can type in your name, your address, the age of your kid, and whether you have siblings in that school, and it will return a mapped list of where you can send your kid to school, and then you can apply from there. So, not rocket science, basic understanding of what we need to do, but we were told after the 10 weeks of working on this and getting up our minimum viable product so that parents could use it, that if this had gone through a procurement, it would have taken 2 years and cost $2 million to build. We could do that quickly because we just had someone inside who could do it. I mean, to be fair, it iterated many times after that and became a real thing that is still serving parents in Boston today. It didn't stop after that 10 weeks. But we couldn't have gotten it going that quickly, and we couldn't have solved these problems for parents in Boston who didn't have 2 years unless we'd had folks on the inside. And this has been one of the big learnings for me in the last 6 years, is that we just haven't thought about design and technology as the kind of thing you do in government. If you were in college, you probably thought about your economics major friends and your legal friends would go into government, and design people would go elsewhere. Well, there's a real cost to that in society right now, and my friend and colleague Tom Steinberg wrote about this back in 2012. He was memorializing a colleague of his who had done civic tech work in the UK. He was a genius and a polymath. He could have done anything in the world that he wanted to do, but he chose to work on technology for the public sector. And what Tom had to say about Chris is that what Chris had fundamentally right is the understanding you can no longer run a country properly if the elites don't understand technology in the same way that they grasp economics or ideology or propaganda. And his analysis and predictions about what would happen if the elites can't learn were savage and depressingly accurate. Now, I returned to this blog post in October of 2013 when I was working at the White House standing up something called the United States Digital Service, because I remembered those words, savage and depressingly accurate. when healthcare.gov launched and didn't work so well in its first couple of weeks. And I figured that's what Tom must have been predicting. But I think he was also predicting a world in which we all are sort of ready to blow it all up because it doesn't work. And I don't mean people vote a particular candidate. I think a lot of people in our society have this Death Star mentality. Can't we find just that one thing? I think it's the exhaust port. If we fire the one shot into the exhaust manifold, some Star Wars geek will get this right, and I swear I'm a Star Wars geek, but I can't remember exactly what it's called. Then the whole thing blows up and we're free from sort of the oppressive tyranny of something, whatever, we're not ever sure what it is that we're going to be free from. But why do we want to blow these things up? Well, in government, one of the things this is pretty clear, and these slides are borrowed from a friend, Clay Johnson, who's been working on this for many years, is that, okay, so if you've got Moore's law going up and society changing incredibly quickly and more quickly every day, imagine that government has just a 10% drag on its ability to innovate and change. Well, it starts to become a little bit of a gap, but play that out over many years and then many more years. And what you have is, so the way he describes it, does anyone remember Moneyball? There's the rich teams, the poor teams, and the A's back then. Now they're awesome. And in between, 50 feet of crap. Well, you've got good services, the things we like to use. What's your favorite app on your phone? The mediocre services, 50 feet of crap, and government services at the bottom. That's not always true today. There are many great apps and many great services in government that are getting so much better. But we still have this big problem. And to return to a theme, if you want to make people's lives better, are you going to do it by giving money to charity? And I think you should give money to charity. Please don't get me wrong. And we are a charity, which spends about $42 billion a year trying to help people with things like food and housing, keeping people out of jail? Or are you going to do it with the $500 billion that we spend through government? How much more efficient do you think we could make that $470 billion? And then do the math. Efficiency is not just a way we get our corporations to work better. It is a matter of social justice, as John Norquist, who was the mayor of Milwaukee, I believe, said. And I'm going to end with a quick story illustrating that. This is another Code for America project in Atlanta in 2013, where the city of Atlanta asked us to bring some Code for America fellows to look at a problem of a lot of people having bench warrants for their arrest just because they had a basic traffic ticket. And our fellows did what most of you would do, which is just to go do the research. Let's dig in. What's going on? And the first thing, it was pretty obvious, is they went to the courthouse and found that you had to wait about 5 hours. Actually, it was a minimum of 5 hours in line to pay a basic traffic ticket, which sounds very inconvenient, but how many people in this room have a job that would not let you off to do that, where you would choose between going and doing that and keeping your job? Well, it turns out a lot of people do have that situation. What we did to try to alleviate it was, this was our sort of minimum viable product. You could text your citation number to a particular number. The cops were wonderful and worked with us and handed these out with traffic tickets. Now, actually, it's printed on the citation itself. And we would text message back and forth with you to get you an appointment, help you figure out how to get this paid, follow up with you if you had an appointment, follow up if you didn't actually clear it. Because, again, if you don't pay that traffic ticket and it just sits, it eventually becomes something called a bench warrant, which many of us have probably had if you have not done that for a traffic ticket or a speeding ticket. But bench warrants really matter a lot. And I knew this, but I didn't really get it until I saw this chart in the New York Times. This is a chart of cities in Missouri in 2013 and bench warrants per 1,000 people. The one on the top there has 1,500 bench warrants per 1,000 people. I'm not very good at math, but I think that's something like 1.5 bench warrants per person. Can you guess what city that is? It's Ferguson. So these things matter a lot. I'm not saying it's causal, but it is an indicator of something that is deeply, deeply wrong. And we could see the pattern in Atlanta, where the people who couldn't pay or couldn't get there to pay those tickets were the people who ended up with a bench warrant. And those people, the next time they ran a red light or had a minor or had a tail light out, were literally in jail for having done nothing that you or I would think merited them being in jail. And that's why I would say in these interesting times, as we're all talking about, please remember that for many people in our country, the status quo is not worth protecting. We have to invent something new, something we haven't seen before, and build that thing that works that people don't want to blow up. And that, particularly in the context of government, which is one of the things I deeply care about, helping make our society work better, you've got to remember that you can't just say it should be done better by someone else. That decisions in state, local, federal government, in social movements are made by the people who show up and can do it. And I have seen this happen in so many cases in government where a different decision was made that benefited people just because someone who had skills and cared came and took a job and started making it a little bit better. We encourage people to think about government, even in these very interesting times, as an important way that you can bring design skills to solving real problems for people in our country who need your help. We are hiring at Code for America. We also, on the bottom there, curate a job board of amazing places you could go work on things like SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, or the child welfare system in California, which is something I don't have time to tell you about in depth, but there are 475,000 reports of abuse and neglect of children in our state every year, and they really don't have very good working software to manage those reports and investigate them and manage cases. And most recently, about a year ago, the state of California decided that they were going to throw out their 6-year, $600 million RFP. Complete waterfall process would be the 8th in a line of large IT failures, and do something agile based on user needs. And they're now trying to hire people to come build that system to work with those 475,000 kids and the caseworkers who are charged with taking care of them. And that's just one of many, many examples of the kinds of work that you can do if you want to bring your design skills into government. Thank you so much for listening. I admire all of you, and I'm excited to be here.